As the sun rises to its zenith on December 13th, 1862, the Irish and Mars Brigade formed their lines in the streets of Fredericksburg, preparing to make their assault against Marye's Heights. While they wait, shells fall among the buildings and packed rows of men. Amid the screeching bombs and crying wounded, Father James Willett moves down the line, giving each man, Catholic and Protestant alike, their final absolution. When Willett finishes, Hancock rides up and orders the advance. Chilled to the bone, Marye leads his fellow countrymen west out of the town. Crossing over the mill race, the Irish suffer further damage, all without firing a shot. Once past this barrier, they reform their lines and fix their bayonets as the sound of clicking ripples down the line. When all are ready, Marye waves his sword to signal the advance. Marching under the emerald flag of Erin, the Irish advance rapidly against the flaming stone wall. With every step they take, men drop by the wayside as bullets and shells crash into the advancing wall of flesh. The lucky survivors try their best not to step on their lifeless comrades, who litter the ground as they move onwards. As the brigade gets within 50 meters of the wall, they are stopped cold, unable to go any further, and dive to the ground. Those unscathed hug the ground for dear life, desperately praying for this nightmare to be over. Yet, despite their prayers, they'll be forced to weather the storm of lead until night puts an end to the killing. Do you think you have what it takes to stand up against Burnside's unrelenting horde or break through Lee's stout entrenchments at Fredericksburg? Perhaps under your leadership you could change the entire course of the war. Well, with Wargame Design Studios' Campaign Chancellorsville, you have a chance to refight two of the most iconic battles from the American Civil War. In Campaign Chancellorsville, you can take command of either the Union or Confederate forces as they spar near the Rappahannock in Hex Bay style combat. Order your infantry to charge forward, send your cavalry out to harass your opponent, and unleash your guns upon unsuspecting formations. In an all-in-one, comprehensive, and historically accurate recreation of the dynamic battles of Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville. With over 300 scenarios to choose from, Campaign Chancellorsville ensures hours of fun and varied gameplay. Head over to wargameds.com/pages/Warhawk to take advantage of a 25% discount offer for Warhawk viewers. Using the discount code Warhawk25 at checkout, you can pick up a copy of Campaign Chancellorsville for only $29.97 between now and December 14th, 2025. If you desire more than just the twin battles along the Rappahannock, Wargame Design Studios also has an extensive American Civil War catalog for you to choose from the early days of 1861 to the final defeat of Lee in 1865. Better yet, if your strategy itch extends further than the mid-19th century, they also have various catalogs featuring many wars from the medieval age to modern conflicts. You can find all these incredible and assorted strategy games on wargameds.com. Midnight, December 11th, 1862. While most men are getting some rest in anticipation of the climactic fight in the morning, Brigadier General Daniel P. Woodbury's engineering brigade are stirring in their camps, readying themselves to assemble the pontoon bridges in the dead of night. Once Burnside decides to cross directly opposite Fredericksburg, Woodbury chooses 3 points to construct the bridges. Opposite Fredericksburg, Woodbury assigns Major Ira Spaulding's 50th New York Engineers to build 3 bridges, 2 at the northern end and 1 at the southern end. A mile south of the town, at Deep Run, the 15th New York Engineers and the U.S. Engineer Battalion will each construct a bridge. Upon hearing their orders, one New York captain scoffs, "For us to attempt to lay a pontoon bridge right in their very faces seemed like madness. In acceptable conditions, the river can be bridged in 2 hours." At 1 a.m., Just as the moon sets below the horizon, the engineers swarm toward their work sites, hoping to take advantage of the darkness before they are spotted. Despite being associated with the South, winters in Virginia are frigid. As the Federals ascend to the banks of the Rappahannock, the temperature stands around 24 degrees Fahrenheit. Luckily, when the sun rises, the temperature will rise to the 50s. This fluctuation in temperature will bury the Rappahannock Valley in a dense sheet of fog, aiding the engineers in their efforts. But until then, the Federals will have to contend with freezing temperatures as they furiously manhandle the pontoons. Expecting resistance once the sun rises, Brigadier General Henry J. Hunt assembles 147 guns in 4 different sections, half the guns in the entire army, atop the heights that dominate the crossings. If Lee dares to attack any of the crossings, his men will be obliterated in their attempt. Along with the artillery, various brigades form to protect the engineers and the work, but until the bridges are built, these men can do little but wait for the engineers to finish their jobs. Meanwhile, across the river, Barksdale's Mississippians and Robertson's Texans huddle in the rifle pits along the western bank of the Rappahannock. Brigadier General William Barksdale, the commander of Fredericksburg, is certain of a Federal move but unsure where it will occur. Expecting a Federal assault at any moment, he orders his men to be ready, along with alerting his superiors. Barksdale also warns the civilians still in the town of the impending danger. Most flee, while others decide to wait out the storm. Around 4:30 p.m., Barksdale confirms the Federal crossing and orders his artillery to fire 2 cannons as a signal for Lee's army to concentrate. The engineers, only halfway done after 4 hours, are greatly concerned that they've been spotted in the middle of the river. While rallying the army for the coming attack, Lee orders Barksdale to hold the enemy in check until ordered to retire. At 5 a.m., the Mississippians stationed in town quickly load their guns and aim at the helpless Federals in the middle of the river. Then, the one word every engineer feared to hear is shouted: "Fire!" From the western bank, a sheet of flame lights up the pre-dawn darkness. Those Federals not hit run for the rear in abject terror. Pandemonium reigns, bodies fall, pontoons riddled, and workers cower behind cover. Burnside's plan for a swift crossing has come to a calamitous halt. Seeing the engineers flee the wall of lead, the Federal artillerymen atop Stafford Heights respond with a tremendous bombardment upon the town. Aiming at the flashes, the batteries pummel the rebel sharpshooters. But with the fog and smoke obscuring their view, it is hard to manage their shots. At daylight, when they can see, Hunt doubles his efforts and unleashes his entire complement of guns upon the town. The Confederates dive into their trenches to avoid the incoming shells. Watching the pyrotechnic display, one enthusiastic infantryman recalls, "It was a great amusement to us to watch a solid shot tear through a building, beat down a wall, topple over a chimney, or root out a nest of sharpshooters." Despite the destruction, the bombardment did little in rooting out the rebels. Federal infantry tries to help out by blazing away at the opposite bank, but find themselves also riddled with bullets. Meanwhile, a mile south of the town at Deep Run, the other detachment of engineers are a lot more successful in completing their bridges. Hearing the cacophony of battle north of them, the Texans are not expecting an attempt to be made in the vicinity. Only until the pickets hear the ice cracking and see a dim outline of a pontoon bridge did the Texans rally. Seeing the flare, the engineers realize their cover is blown. Close to being finished, the engineers rush to construction. Watching the engineers furiously manhandle the pontoons into place, one artilleryman laughingly recalled, "The pontooniers work like beavers." Unlike their comrades upriver, these engineers at Deep Run managed to complete their spans without any resistance. Robertson, refusing to let the Federals off easily, orders a sortie against the engineers, who scatter in the face of the Texans. Stopping at the banks, these men riddle the fleeing New Yorkers with bullets. But just as they reach the river, the supporting Federal artillery blasts away at the Texans, who are forced to retreat to the Bowling Green Road. Despite his attempt, there's little Robertson's men can do to halt the engineers. Franklin, though considered to be extremely cautious, implores Burnside to let him cross with his left Grand Division and flank the Confederates in the town. Luckily for Barksdale, Burnside refuses to let Franklin advance until all 3 sections are completed, forcing those at the northern spans to deal with the rebels alone. Upriver, the engineers would try again and again to work on the pontoons, but each time they are riddled with bullets. Whole work groups are shredded just trying to make their way down the spans. Every time an engineer falls wounded or killed, it reduces the speed at which the pontoons can be built. Those unskilled in construction could do little to help, leaving the task to the engineers, who fret about returning to the bridges. One captain dramatically wrote, "There's little we can do but die." By 2:30 p.m., after having his engineers stalled in front of Fredericksburg for 10 hours, desperation is coming to a head for Burnside. So much so that the general grasps at any solution that can break the riverine stalemate. Just then, his chief of artillery appears with a grand idea. Use the pontoons to ferry troops across to establish a protected beachhead. This will allow the engineers to complete the spans without any resistance. Upon hearing Hunt's idea, Burnside leaps at it but then backs off. Refusing to take responsibility for the crossing, he will only allow it if Hunt finds volunteers to undertake the operation. With the go-ahead, Hunt hunts down the nearest troops at hand. After searching for a few minutes, Hunt finds Colonel Hall, who volunteers the 7th Michigan, his own regiment, for the operation. The Wolverines will cross at the northern section, while the 89th New York will cross at the southern section. With the operation planned out, the artillery lights up the riverfront at 3 p.m., forcing the rebels to once again dive for cover. After a furious 30-minute bombardment, the artillery goes silent, signaling the volunteers to cross. With a signal, the Michiganders and New Yorkers rush to the boats and shove off. Once the Federals start paddling across the river, there are sitting ducks for the rebel sharpshooters, who pepper the boats. The volunteers get down as low as possible, but many are struck while crossing. In the storm of lead, the Federals reach the other side and claw their way up the steep bank. Once in the town, the Michiganders shout "No quarter" and attack the Mississippians still present. The two sides grapple along Sophia Street until the rebels buckle under the pressure, allowing the Federals to establish a primitive bridgehead. This success wins the 7th Michigan more than just a momentary victory. They're the first in American history to secure a bridgehead after crossing a river under fire. Under pressure, Pfizer's 17th Mississippi falls back to Caroline Street. Unable to push the landing parties back into the river, the Mississippians do the best they can to halt the Federal advance. Soon, the 19th Massachusetts lands as well to support their embattled comrades. By 4 p.m., with no more resistance, the engineers finally complete the span, allowing the Federals to flood into Fredericksburg. Once Hall is able to get the rest of his brigade over, they push deeper into the town. Here, the two sides discover a new style of warfare in United States history: urban combat. Street to street, building to building, window to window, the two sides clash throughout Fredericksburg. In the growing darkness, the hidden Confederates surprise the Federals at every corner. Amidst the fighting, the 20th Massachusetts, leading the advance, wheels into the intersection of Hawk and Caroline Streets and is caught in a crossfire by the hidden Mississippians. In a 50-yard space, 97 officers and men are gunned down in mere minutes. Josiah Murphy, who's wounded in that bloodbath, recalls, "In no battle of the war in which we were afterwards engaged did we lose so many men in so short a time." The rebels will make the Federals pay in blood for every street they cross. However, at the highest point of the town on Princess Anne Street, the Confederates realize their position is becoming untenable as they watch thousands of Federals flood into the town. Seeing the writing on the wall, Major General Lafayette McLaws orders his subordinate to withdraw just as darkness consumes the bloody streets. Yet Barksdale, always ready for a scrap, continues to fight until there's no more light left. Holding on at the market house, the Mississippians stymie every advance the Federals make. Only when night finally blots out the landscape and the Federals pull back to Caroline Street did Barksdale follow orders. At 7 p.m., Barksdale successfully disengages and pulls his men back to Marye's Heights. For over 14 hours, Barksdale and his Mississippians have stymied Burnside in his attempt to cross the Rappahannock. In this stalwart defense, Barksdale secures Lee another crucial day to prepare the Army of Northern Virginia to face Burnside at Fredericksburg. Praising his subordinate, Longstreet declares, "A more gallant and worthy service is rarely accomplished by so small a force." For the Federals, The stubborn defense made by the rebels disrupted Burnside's plan for a swift strike towards Richmond. Due to this predicament, Burnside is forced to contend with the rebel army entrenched atop the heights south and west of Fredericksburg, the complete opposite of his plan. That, however, is for another day. For now, the thoroughly exhausted Federals bed down among the rubble from the day's fight, knowing full well the fighting they experienced this day is only the beginning of a climactic battle that is brewing between the two giants. As the sun rises on December 12th, 1862, it proves to be a foggy yet as balmy as the previous day, with a temperature recording of 56 degrees. Despite a huge battle looming on the horizon, both sides use this day to prepare for that eventual clash. Along the heights surrounding Fredericksburg, the Confederates in Longstreet's sector work feverishly to strengthen their defenses, clearing fields of fire and familiarizing themselves with the terrain. Facing the town, Longstreet's First Corps runs for about 4 miles, from the Rappahannock to Deep Run. Anchoring his left on the Rappahannock is Major General Richard H. Anderson's division. Brigadier General Robert Ransom Jr.'s small division of North Carolinians cover Marye's Heights. McLaws' division forms south of Telegraph Road, while the two final divisions of Major Generals George E. Pickett and John B. Hood form in the woods behind Deep Run. Behind Longstreet's line, Lee sets up his headquarters at Telegraph Hill, a position that allows the general to see both ends of his line. In the middle of Longstreet's line is the Georgian Brigade under Brigadier General Thomas R. Cobb, who has lined up his men behind a sunken stone wall in front of Marye's Heights. The Georgians further enhance their position by deepening the road to form a trench. Despite its strong characteristics, it juts out in front of Longstreet's line, creating a salient near the city, a potential location for Burnside to target when he begins his attacks. Meanwhile, further south, Jackson forms his Second Corps in the woods atop Prospect Hill. Compared to Longstreet's entrenched forces, the only defense they have is the Richmond, Fredericksburg, and Potomac Railroad that runs along the edge of Prospect Hill. Due to the lack of any natural features to rely upon, Jackson opts to stack his divisions along a narrow sector, about 2 miles long, with Major General A.P. Hill's Light Division in the front. In the middle of Hill's line sits a triangular marsh that the Virginia believes to be impassable. Due to this pesky terrain, Hill is forced to straddle his division on it. Finally, anchoring the Army's right flank is Major General Jeb Stuart's Cavalry Division, watching for any potential flank attack. With its units in place, the only thing the Confederates can do now is anxiously wait for Burnside to make his move. Across the plains in Fredericksburg, the Army of the Potomac floods across the pontoon bridges to the western side of the Rappahannock. Despite wanting to commence his attacks on the 12th, Burnside does not specify when or where his corps will assault. With no clear instructions, the Federal Corps casually marched to their positions. Due to a lack of clear plans and urgency, Burnside's commanders fritter away the majority of the day getting into position. This delay forces an agitated Burnside to postpone his attacks until tomorrow, allowing Lee to have another full day to strengthen his defenses. Forming in the streets of Fredericksburg is Major General Sumner's Right Grand Division. Major General Couch and his Second Corps form the Army's right flank at the northern end of the town, while Brigadier General Orlando B. Wilcox forms his 9th Corps south of the town in the gap between the left and right Grand Divisions. Connecting with Wilcox's 9th Corps is Major General William B. Franklin's left Grand Division, which forms the Army's left flank. Straddling Deep Run is the 6th Corps under the command of Major General William F. Baldy Smith. Finally, anchoring the Army's left flank is Major General John F. Reynolds' 1st Corps. Not wanting to jam all of his corps on the western bank, Burnside holds Major General Joseph Hooker's Center Grand Division on the eastern side of the Rappahannock. Hooker's command represents Burnside's reserve, who stands ready to cross the river at a moment's notice. Facing the upper pontoon crossings is Major General Daniel Butterfield's 5th Corps. while Brigadier General George Stoneman's 3rd Corps faces the lower crossing. With all of his units in position, Burnside ponders how he will go about attacking Lee's formidable defenses. Despite the majority of his army crossing to the western side of the Rappahannock, Burnside will remain at Sumner's headquarters atop Stafford Heights at Chatham Manor when the battle begins. The manor proves to be an ideal location for Burnside to control the movements of his army across the river. To ensure an ease of communication between the various corps, Burnside has his Signal Corps set up telegram lines between him and his commanders. This link will provide Burnside with nearly instant communication with his subordinates on the battlefield, another first for the United States Armed Forces. After touring the Right Grand Division's placement amid the rubble of Fredericksburg, Burnside rides south to inspect the left. Here he meets with Franklin, who implores his general to target Prospect Hill rather than Marye's Heights. Franklin reasons that Jackson's position is less formidable than Longstreet's entrenched men. However, the plan has a few caveats. First, he wants to attack before dawn to take advantage of the darkness. And second, he needs some of Hooker's men to guard the crossings in case Lee counterattacks if their initial attack fails. Convinced of their plan's merit, Burnside leaves his commanders, promising the orders will be forthcoming as light begins to fade. While most get ready to bed down for the night, chaos ensues in the ruined streets of Fredericksburg. With the residents mostly gone, many of the men in the Right Grand Division plunder the abandoned houses. Animals are slaughtered, food is stolen, beds are used, pianos are destroyed, cabinets are rummaged, possessions are taken, and liquor is consumed. All types of articles are found littered in the streets. Nothing of value is left untouched by the rambunctious Federals. A Pennsylvania watching the madness recalls that the Northerners plundered in a manner worthy of the most Gothic of Goths or hungriest of Huns. For the first time in 50 years, not since the British sack of Washington, D.C. during the War of 1812, is another American city sacked by an army. Yet, unlike the Northerners, the British mainly spared private property from being touched. While some are aghast at the blatant destruction of Fredericksburg by their comrades, others justify their looting as punishment for the city's support of secession. Only until the Federals tire themselves out in this craze do they feel any remorse. Looking at the ruined heaps of a once proud city, a Minnesotan admits, in short, everything was destroyed, and the citizens of Fredericksburg are houseless, homeless, and destitute. It will be a hard winter of intense hardship for them. Once the chaos that engulfed the destroyed streets finally end, did things settle down. Many tried to get some sleep, but couldn't help but think by this time tomorrow, untold thousands of men on both sides will have fought their last fight. December 13th, 1862 proves to be another unseasonably warm day that will reach nearly 60 degrees as fog blankets the surrounding area. The Confederates rise at dawn and form their battle lines in anticipation of an attack that is surely to come. Across the field at Mansfield, the Left Grand Division headquarters, an agitated Franklin waits for his orders to come from Burnside. Despite wanting to attack before dawn, orders do not arrive until 7:30 a.m. When the general reads the order, he is astonished at what Burnside intends for his forces. Burnside's plan of attack is for Franklin to send at least a division to seize Prospect Hill if possible, while keeping the remainder of his force ready to make a rapid march around Lee's right flank to cut off his communications with Richmond. While Franklin's attack is underway, Sumner will make another lodgment on Lee's left flank around Marye's Heights. With Lee wedged between two forces, Burnside expects Lee to retreat from his entrenched position and away from Richmond. If all goes to plan, Lee will be cut off from the Confederate capital. However, Franklin, unlike the other generals in the army, lacks a creative mind. Perplexed about the weakly worded order, unwilling to ask for clarification, and not wanting to waste time, Franklin decides to carry out the orders verbatim. Instead of a general assault, the Left Grand Division, which has around 60,000 men on hand to use, will send a single division against Jackson's line. Franklin chooses Reynolds' First Corps, who in turn selects Major General George G. Meade's 4,500-strong Pennsylvania reserves to spearhead the attack. With the unit selected, Reynolds marches his First Corps south and lines it up along the Bowling Green Road with Meade's Pennsylvanians in the middle. Arriving on the right is Smith's Sixth Corps, which is sent to guard the right flank. Once his division is ready, Meade rides ahead to reconnoiter the field he will have to cross. For the most part, the land between the road and the railroad is flat, but features many irrigation ditches that can be as deep as 5 feet. Once past these obstacles, Meade hopes to slice a military road that connects the two wings of the Confederate Army. Before they attack, Reynolds wants to proceed the assault with a bombardment to soften the rebel lines. At 10 a.m., right before Reynolds unleashes his guns upon Jackson, Doubleday's left is thrown into confusion as it is shredded by a hidden Confederate battery on their flank. The grand battle for Fredericksburg has begun. This single gun is led by Stuart's chief of artillery, the intrepid 24-year-old Major John Pelham. Pelham, seeing a chance to inflate the advancing Federals, receives permission from Stuart to take one gun for his adventure. After finding a defilade, he waits until he has their flank and blasts away. Shocked by this unexpected attack, those not hit drop to the ground in abject terror. The Federal batteries try to silence Pelham's gun, but they are unable to land a hit. Stuart tries to send another gun to support Pelham, but the Federals luckily land a shot that disables the supporting piece. Watching this action from Prospect Hill, Lee declares, "It is so glorious to see such courage in one so young." After an hour of enduring an incessant storm of shot and shell, Pelham pulls his lone gun back after running low on ammunition. Once Pelham is gone, Meade moves forward. Watching from Prospect Hill, one Confederate writes about the advancing Yanks. "It was a grand sight. We can see their guns and bayonets glittering in the sun." Just as Reynolds' men are halfway to Jackson's line, they are pummeled by Confederate artillery on their front and flank. Just as Jackson has planned, Reynolds has marched his corps into a slaughter pen. Those who survive the carnage drop down for cover. Unable to do anything, the infantry cowers in the fields, praying not to get hit. Seeing this assault stall, Meade waves on the batteries, who return the favor. But instead of targeting the infantry, the Federal guns draw a bead upon their rebel counterparts. Gun crews are killed, carriages are destroyed, and guns are disabled. For almost an hour and a half, the Federal guns wreak havoc upon the rebel artillery. By 1 p.m., once it is obvious that the rebel guns have been handled, Meade sends his Pennsylvanians forward. Advancing onward, the mud-covered Yankees swarm over the ditches until they reach the railroad embankments. Once here, Archer's Tennesseans and Lane's North Carolinians unload their guns upon them. Barely minutes into the fight, all three of Meade's brigadiers are hit. Jackson, no relation to the Confederate chief, is killed instantly by a bullet that pierces his skull. Sinclair has his foot mangled and is forced to vacate the field, while Magilton finds himself trapped under his dead horse. Leaderless, frightened, and shot on the flanks, the Pennsylvanians flood into the swampy woods, right into the gap the Confederate High Command deemed impassable. Positioned behind the gap is Gregg's South Carolinians, who mistake the Federals for friends and hold their fire. The Pennsylvanians do not have the same problem and unload their rifles. Gregg, who is partially deaf, told his men not to fire, and right after is mortally wounded when a bullet severs his spinal cord. With their commander wounded and the brigade shattered, the South Carolinians flee the field. In about 30 minutes, Meade has sliced through Hill's line and now threatens to uproot both Lane and Archer. The rebels, seeing the brigades collapse, call on nearby commands for help, but before they arrive, the Pennsylvanians enter a melee with Archer's Tennesseans. In the fight, Adjutant Woodward and Corporal Carr of the 7th Reserves capture the flag and over 100 men for the 19th Georgia in the fray, earning both the Medal of Honor. Despite this achievement, the Pennsylvanians are alone facing the entirety of Jackson's 2nd Corps. Just as they are about to collapse, Gibbon's men arrive to support them. Yet, unlike Meade's men, Gibbon's men do not have the woods to cover their approach. Without cover, Taylor's Yankees are stopped cold by Lane's Tar Heels. One of Taylor's men writes that, "The rebels made a terrible slaughter in our ranks. It was impossible to advance as our boys fell as fast as they attempted it." Unable to go any further, they get out of the way of Lyle's men, who also sputter in the face of resistance. After Taylor and Lyle are tapped out, Root's New Yorkers are sent forward. Charging ahead, they catch Lane's men at the very moment they're out of ammunition. Here, the two sides thrust their bayonets at each other until the Federal numbers become telling, forcing the North Carolinians to flee. However, due to the heavy casualties, Gibbon pulls his 3 brigades back to the railroad. By 2 p.m., Reynolds' men have cracked the rebels' first line of defense. Burnside's plan is working, but to hold on to their objectives, they need reinforcements, and they need them fast. If Jackson cannot break this Federal lodgment, the Confederate forces might have to abandon their position. Thus, victory will fall to whoever can rush reinforcements into the gap. While Reynolds' 1st Corps is locked in a stalemate with Jackson's men, Birney's division of the 3rd Corps is called up to support them. Yet, being stationed on the eastern side of the Rappahannock, it takes time for them to arrive. Only when the 1st Corps' attack wanes does Birney arrive in the area. Meade, desperate for reinforcements, calls on Birney, who outright refuses to march to his aid. Hearing of this refusal, Meade curses Birney in such a manner that a bystander says that Meade's tone was enough to make the stones creep. While the Federal generals argue where to send troops, Early's division bursts onto the scene to rescue Hill's demoralized men. After hearing reports of the disaster taking shape on the fronts, Early dispatches his brigades to turn the tide of the battle, but cautions his officers not to go beyond the railroad. Leading the advance, Atkinson and his Georgians, trailed by Hoke and Walker, charged downhill towards the gap. The Federals, not expecting a coordinated counterattack, stampede for the rear. Further north, Pender's North Carolinians and Thomas's Georgians beat back a renewed advance by Gibbon. With victory slipping from his grasp, Meade rallies his brigades behind the railroad, hoping to salvage the increasingly desperate situation. With no ammunition, Meade cannot hold against the fresh soldiers in Early's division. Raising the rebel yell, Early's men bound towards the embankment. Here, the enemies lock arms in vicious hand-to-hand combat. However, Meade's men begin to break when the stranded combat becomes too great to bear and retreat back towards the river. Following up on their success and against Early's order, Atkinson's Georgians charge after the retreating Federals. Seeing Atkinson's men move forward, the adjacent brigades follow suit. Not expecting the Confederates to reach this far, the Federal batteries switch to canister and shoot bloody gaps in their lines. This alone is not enough to stop the furious rebel charge, forcing Birney to halt this attack himself. Atkinson, hoping to capture the guns, directs his men towards them, but is hit in the shoulder by a canister ball. When word spreads of Atkinson's wounding, the leaderless Georgians break off the attack. Left on the field by his men, Atkinson is the only brigade commander on either side to be captured at Fredericksburg. Watching the Confederate counterattack from his headquarters, Lee tells Longstreet, "It is well that war is so terrible, or we grow too fond of it." While Atkinson's men are being repulsed by Birney's division, Gibbon starts losing his grip on the right flank. Sensing weakness, Pender and Thomas charge Gibbon's Federals and send them back flying in short order. With a repulse of Gibbon's division at 2:30 p.m., the hopeful chance of victory at Prospect Hill for Franklin has been turned into a devastating defeat. Meade, watching the repulse of his division, complains to his corps commander, "My God, General Reynolds, do they think my division could whip Lee's entire army?" Once the crescendo of guns ceases, the air fills with the screams of the wounded. Thousands of men, both blue and gray, lay strewn across the fields, marshes, and woods in front of Jackson's position. Despite this vast amount of human carnage, Burnside's army is nowhere close to achieving the goals their commander so desires. The rebuffed Federals hold their positions in the Smithfield Ravine, around where they started a mere 5 hours earlier. While each side is reforming their bloody lines, 26-year-old Brigadier General George D. Bayard is mortally wounded while leisurely resting at Franklin's headquarters when a Confederate shell skips in and severs his leg. Bayard dies 4 days short of his 27th birthday. and the same day he was set to marry his fiancée. With the southern end of the battle all but concluded, those alive turned their heads north to listen to the sounds of battle coming from the town. The fight for Fredericksburg is heating up as Burnside orders wave after wave of soldiers against the defiant Georgians holding the stone wall in front of Marye's Heights. While Franklin's left Grand Division is frozen in the face of Pelham's audacious attack, Sumner's right Grand Division is forming its lines to begin its assault upon the Confederate left flank. Similar to Franklin, Sumner's ordered the force of lodgment on Marye's Heights just west of Fredericksburg. Compared to Franklin, the commanders in Fredericksburg understand their orders. Without any confusion, Couch forms up the 2nd Corps into a column of divisions while the 9th Corps stretches left to connect with the 6th Corps. Because Howard's division captured the town 2 days before, Couch designates French's division to lead the attack. In turn, French selects Kimball's Gibraltar Brigade to act as a corps spearhead. With Confederate pickets hanging on the fringes of the town, Kimball plans to attack and pursue them, using them as a shield in their advance against the Stonewall. If everything goes to plan, Kimball hopes to fall upon the Confederate defenders without much loss of life. However, due to the varying temperature and vast amounts of fog, the fairgrounds between the mill race and Marye's Heights have been turned into a quagmire. Any troops attempting to advance through here will have to slog their way across. Besides the open ground, a splatter of houses and fences provide the only cover the Federals will be able to use. Facing this impending onslaught is Cobb's Georgia Brigade hunkered behind the sunken stone wall, while backed up by Walton's famed Washington Artillery of Louisiana, entrenched atop Marye's Heights. Despite its impressive defensive features, many expect the position to be overrun as soon as the Federals begin their attack. Unlike Jackson, Longstreet does not benefit from having multiple layers of infantry to defend his position. If there's a breakthrough, the Federals will have nearly unchecked access to Longstreet's rear. Trying his best to assure Longstreet, Lieutenant Colonel E. Porter Alexander tells him, "General, we cover that ground now so well that we comb it as with a fine-tooth comb. A chicken cannot live on that field when we open on it." At 11 a.m., just as the fog lifts, French orders Kimball's men forward. Just as they move out, the Federals are instantly hit by the artillery atop Marye's Heights. Crossing over the mill race, the Federals send the pickets retreating, but are unable to keep pace due to the mud slowing them down. The carnage is so great that arms, hands, legs, and clothing are sent in all directions. Once halfway across the fairgrounds, Cobb's Georgians open up as well, stopping Kimball's men dead in their tracks. Unable to advance any further, the Federals dive for cover. Surprised by the effects of their volleys, Samuel M.H. Byrd of Phillips Legion recalls, "I have been over many spots where the dead were strewn on the battlefields of Virginia, but on no spot did I see so many dead as there was in front of our position." While trying to urge his men forward, Kimball receives a painful wound to his right thigh, forcing him to quit the field. After an hour of fighting and seeing no success, French orders his 2 brigades to support Kimball, Andrew's New Yorkers and Palmer's Yankees. As they advance, neither brigade can leave the confines of the town without being targeted by the Confederate batteries. Just like Kimball's men before them, these supporting brigades are shredded in their assault. Witnessing the carnage, a Pennsylvania soldier writes, "Shells screech overhead and explode in the ranks, appearing to lift the earth from its foundation." Unable to advance without withering away in the storm of lead, French's men retreat to the safety of the town, leaving a field covered in the bodies of their fallen comrades. Wanting to continue the pressure against Longstreet's line, Couch orders forward Hancock's 1st Division at 12:30 p.m. While waiting for Hancock's men to ready themselves for the attack, the two sides battle in an intense artillery duel. The Federals suffer immensely in their exposed positions, while the Confederates barely suffer a scratch. The only serious casualties for the Confederates are the wounding of Cocke and Cobb. The former receives a skull fracture from a bullet, while the latter has an artery severed by a shell. Despite considering the wound to be minor, Cobb will succumb to his injuries that night. Realizing the bombardment failed to do any real damage against the Confederate line, Hancock unleashes his men against Marye's Heights. Zook, leading the 1st Division, crosses a mill race and charges a stone wall. Trying their best to avoid the human debris, Zook's men are mauled by the Georgians. Unable to advance any further, Zook's men dive for cover to wait reinforcements. As Zook's men are being chewed up by the rebels, Hancock sends forward Marye's Irish Brigade to reinforce them. Marching towards the battle, the Irishmen present an interesting sight, as each man of the brigade has attached a sprig of green boxwood to their hats to represent their Irish heritage. Charging over the piles of dead and wounded comrades, the Irish are unable to get past the men from the earlier fight. Once it is obvious they cannot persist any longer in the storm of lead, the Irish break for the rear after only 30 minutes. Following in Marye's wake, Caldwell leads his Yanks across the killing field. However, they are also wrecked in their advance. Caldwell, pushing his men forward, receives 2 painful wounds that forces him to the rear. When his men see their commander leave, they follow suit. Fearing the Confederates will respond with a counterattack, Sumner orders the rest of the 2nd Corps to the front while also calling on the 9th Corps for support. Leaving the northern end of Fredericksburg, Howard advances his division towards the defiant stone wall at 1:15 p.m. Leading Howard's assault is Owens' veteran Philadelphia Brigade. Charging under a murderous storm of shot and shell, the Philadelphians dive for cover, only popping up the fire volley before going back down. While Owens' men are stuck in the fairgrounds, Count sends Hall's brigade around Owens' right, hoping to catch the Confederates off guard. But the rebels are prepared and stop them cold in their tracks with a wall of lead. One survivor of Hall's attack remembers, "No one who has not witnessed such a scene can form any idea of the awfulness of that hour." Running low on ammunition, Longstreet dispatches Ranson's division of North Carolinians to reinforce Cobb. Rushing forward, Ranson's Tar Heels find out to their dismay that crossing the lip of Marye's Heights exposes them to vengeful fire. After running the gauntlet, the North Carolinians join the stalwart Georgians behind the stone wall. Here, the rebels form 3 lines deep to ensure a steady rate of fire sent against the attacking Federals. In this formation, the rebels begin a systematic murder of the attacking Federals. The back rank loads, the middle rank passes the rifle forward, and the cracked shots in the front rank fire. At this rate, an unrelenting wall of lead is sent against the Yankee attackers. Watching the Confederate reinforcements arrive, Count sends forward Sully's men to help their embattled comrades. Sully, already low in numbers, does nothing more than support Hall's survivors. While the 2nd Corps is bashing its head against Marye's Heights, Wilcox sends Sturgis's division forward to the rescue. At 2 p.m., leading Sturgis's division, Ferrero advances against the rebels, but just like the entirety of the 2nd Corps before them, they are riddled with shot and shell. Just as Ferrero's attack begins, it falls apart. With his formation all but gone, Ferrero calls on Nagel to the rescue. Nagel tries to advance, but his command is tangled up in the railroad cuts. Being caught in the open, Nagel's men lie down on the ground, praying not to get hit. In the 3 hours since the attacks began against Marye's Heights, 4 divisions from 2 separate corps have been completely wrecked. Thousands of Federals, alive, wounded, and dead, lay strewn about in front of the unconquerable stone wall, with no real tangible prize to show for their efforts. Just like the men facing Prospect Hill, defeat is beginning to loom over the heads of those still alive. If Burnside does not salvage the battle soon, there is a real possibility they will suffer the worst loss ever at the hands of Lee. While the men of the Right Grand Division have done little but die in front of Marye's Heights, Burnside, standing atop Stafford Heights, becomes consumed by the growing calamity on his right, to the point he neglects his main assault upon Prospect Hill. Wanting to stabilize the Fredericksburg sector, Burnside sends Hooker's Center Grand Division across the Rappahannock to support Sumner's embattled men, while also dispatching another attack order to Franklin in hopes that he will distract the Confederates. Despite not having more men to continue the fight that Burnside wants, a firefight breaks out between the 2 forces in Deep Run. After a successful surprise attack, Torbert's New Jerseyans capture a section of the railroad in front of Hood's division. Seeing the advance, Law's brigade of North Carolinians charge and recapture the position, driving Torbert back. Inspired by their success, Law pursues the retreating Bluecoats, straight into a gap in the 6th Corps' line. Just as they near the Federal position, Law's rebels are hit by a wall led by Sickles' waiting division. Mauled in their attack, Law's men limp back to their line. Despite the limited success Hood's division gained, neither he nor Longstreet opt to continue the fight. Meanwhile, on the Union right, Burnside orders for the 5th Corps to reinforce the battered right Grand Division. Cutting through the sea of chaos that is the streets of Fredericksburg, the 5th Corps lunges forward against the impenetrable Stonewall at 3:30 p.m. Lead on Butterfield's attack is Griffin's 1st Division, with Barnes' brigade of New Englanders at the head. Once they enter the fairgrounds, their advance stopped cold. Seeing Barnes' men frozen, Sweetser's brigade of Massachusetts men join their comrades, but find their command jumbled into a mass of humanity, with the other brigades still present in the killing fields. With neither brigade making any headway, Griffin orders Stockton's New Yorkers to assist them. Pushing to the right, Stockton's men near a swell, but dive for cover once the storm of lead becomes too hot for them to bear. With Griffin's division all shot up, Humphrey's brand new division of 9-month Pennsylvanians is rushed into the meat grinder. Leading off the attack around 4:15 p.m. is Allebach with Tyler on his tail. These two Green brigades charge forward, hoping to finally capture the crest, but are riddled by shot and shell. Just as Humphrey's men start to feel the full force of the Confederate artillery, it slackens. After 5 hours of dominating the fairgrounds, Walton's Washington artillery is nearing its last rounds. Unable to keep up the rate of fire and no replacements at hand, Walton is forced to pull his pieces back. In this respite, Humphrey gathers his regiments and charges the Stonewall with fixed bayonets. Just as the Federal attackers move within 50 yards of the wall, they are hit by a storm of canister from fresh artillery crews, forcing these Gout recruits to the ground. Unable to maintain their position in such proximity, Humphrey's men retreat to the rear. As the sun starts to dip below the crest of Marye's Heights, the soldiers who have not been committed pray not to be sent forward. However, their generals, wanting to ensure that no counterattack comes, are forced to keep the pressure up until there's no more light left. At 5 p.m., General Getty of the 9th Corps receives orders from Hooker to attack the southern end of Marye's Heights. In the gathering twilight, the Confederates expected Humphrey's attack to be the last for the day. Not expecting another assault, the Confederates hold their fire. In the growing darkness, Hawkins' New Yorkers get within 50 yards of the stone wall before they receive a murderous volley from the waiting Confederates. This volley stirs up everybody, who fires blindly in the darkness as cannons and muskets light up the night sky, illuminating those still on the field. Realizing their attack is thwarted, Hawkins pulls his men back before they are shredded. Around the same time of the Federal attack upon Marye's Heights, Jackson is planning to launch his entire 2nd Corps, almost half of Lee's army, against Franklin's disorganized Left Grand Division. But before Stonewall lets his men loose upon the Yanks, he orders his artillery to fire, who are smothered by Federal cavalry battery fire. Surprised to see such volume, Jackson ultimately cancels his assault upon Franklin. As the order filters down with news of the canceled attack, many in Jackson's corps breathe a sigh of relief. Once the artillery fire ebbs, silence consumes the blood-swept terrain in front of the Confederate positions. After hours of unadulterated murder, December 13th, the bloodiest day of the battle, has finally come to an end. Even though the battle is over, thousands of Federal soldiers who are still alive in the fairgrounds face a new ordeal. Due to Hawkins' nighttime assault, the jumpy Confederates manning the stone wall fire anything that moves, forcing those still alive to remain among their dead and wounded comrades. Trapped in the battlefield, these men make the best of their situation, such as Joshua Chamberlain, Lieutenant Colonel of the 20th Maine, who curls up with nearby bodies to survive the frigid night. As the Yankee foot soldiers sleep in the blood-soaked mud, their commanders are meeting across the river to plan the next day's fighting. Burnside, exhausted, depressed, and desperate to turn around the catastrophe, declares to his officers that he will lead an all-out dawn attack against the Stonewall at the head of his 9th Corps. However, his officers, especially those who witnessed the outright slaughter of their men, vehemently protest his decision. While the Federal officers argue with their commander, the Confederates relish in their apparent victory. All along the entire front, the Federals have been severely thrashed in their attempts to break the rebel lines. Unlike Jackson, who had his first line broken, the Federals did not even reach Longstreet's line. The victory is so complete that many officers did not even think that Burnside has thrown his best punch. Lee, reckoning Burnside will try again tomorrow, orders his men to be ready for the contest to renew in the morning. December 14th, 1862 dawns bright and cold, with a temperature hovering in the 40s as mists blanket the valley. As light consumes the area, the Confederate defenders grasp their weapons as they train their eyes upon Fredericksburg, waiting for Burnside's anticipated attack to begin. Yet, nothing happens. Even the Federals, who physically shake at the thought of attacking again, wait to see what will occur. Burnside, waking up late in the morning, is even uncertain about his own plan. Seeing his general confused, Sumner takes Burnside to the side and convinces him of the folly of such a plan. When Burnside hears Sumner disapprove of the attack, he ultimately decides to cancel it. Despite the expectation of another day of fighting, no attack will come this day. With no action planned for this day, sharpshooters keep up a lively fire. Anyone brave enough to move on the fairgrounds will provoke a volley. Many Federals, still trapped on the battlefield from the day before, cannot move without fear of being hit. For many, especially those who have lain wounded for over a day, are out of water. Unable to move, unable to quench their thirst, they beg for anyone to give them some help. For both sides, it is hard to witness this as they are unable to render these men any assistance. No one dares to go out except for one man. Moved by the plight of the wounded, 19-year-old Sergeant Richard R. Kirkland of the 2nd South Carolina decides to try. After obtaining permission from General Kershaw, Kirkland gathers a handful of canteens from his comrades and ventures out into no man's land. Despite provoking shots from Federal sharpshooters, Kirkland goes from wounded to wounded, giving them a drink and attending to their needs. Once both sides realize what he's doing, they stop their firing and cheer on this angel. Spurred on by his humanity, more men from both sides start venturing out to help as well. Witnessing the scene, one Northerner writes, "Such deeds as this are the redeeming features of war." For the rest of the day, both sides tend to the thousands of wounded spread across the battlefield. 17 years after the battle in 1879, when interviewed by a newspaper, General Kershaw instantly named Kirkland as the Angel Marye's Heights. While the two sides halt the kill and attend to the wounded, Burnside and his subordinates meet to decide their next move. From the beginning, it is clear that nobody wants to attack again and nobody wants to retreat. Unable to resolve their dilemma, Burnside ends the meeting and rides to Washington, hoping to see what Halleck will recommend. With no action taking place on the 14th, both sides watch as the sun dips below the horizon. Despite the enormous battle that just took place the day before, this night will be remembered by all those who witness it. Once darkness completely encompasses the area, the aurora borealis radiates across the night sky. Watching the spectacle, one eyewitness wrote, "The heavens were filled with long streaks of pale yellow light, then blended together and turned to a blood red." For many of the Southerners who have never seen the Northern Lights, believe it to be a good omen. A Confederate artillerist suggests that the heavens were hanging out banners and streamers and setting off fireworks in honor of our victory. Once the Northern Lights dissipate, the men on both sides bed down for the night, anxious to see what the next day brings. As the sun rises on the 5th day of the battle, it becomes all too apparent that Burnside is completely played out. Unable to marshal his men for another fight, Burnside ultimately decides to pull his army back across the river they fought so hard to cross. After collecting their wounded, the Army of the Potomac limps back across the bridges, and the pontoons are taken apart. Once the last boat is pulled out of the river, the lopsided Battle of Fredericksburg comes to a close. From every angle, the battle is an unmitigated disaster for the North. Despite the comparable casualty rate at Prospect Hill between Franklin's and Jackson's forces, the absolute slaughter of Federal troops in front of Marye's Heights, with a staggering 8-to-1 casualty ratio, has turned this defeat into an unadulterated calamity for Burnside. The grounds in front of Jackson's and Longstreet's positions are strewn with the Union dead. The bodies are packed together so compactly that in some places you're unable to even touch the ground. In total, the North suffered a casualty rate of 11% compared to the South's 7.5%. Regardless of how low the casualty rate is for both sides, those engaged, especially the Federals, witnessed hell on earth. Burnside, desperate to prove himself in a capacity he himself doubted, threw his men in unimaginative assaults against stout, multi-layered entrenchments, backed up by well-placed artillery. Despite hoping for the best, the results were never in doubt. Burnside's gallant soldiers had no chance of breaking through the Confederate lines. The general, regardless of Washington's prodding for him to campaign in such frigid conditions, is ultimately the person to blame for this defeat. Assuming the responsibility for the loss and desperate to restore his reputation, Burnside would not let the winter pass idly. Once his men are fit again, he will order them out on miserable marches through the mud in the dead of winter, hoping to gain the edge over their victorious foe. In this tragedy, only a few officers, such as Generals Hancock, Hunt, and Meade, proved their mettle in the hopeless attacks. Of those three, Meade shone above the rest, achieving the most success in the battle by cracking Jackson's first line of defense with little more than a division, while the others, like Franklin and Hooker, whether deceitful or not, proved useless in their positions. The stigma wrought by the disaster at Fredericksburg will stay with the Army of the Potomac for a long time after they depart from this accursed town. From then on, the soldiers of this army will never forget what happened on the banks of the Rappahannock in December of 1862, and will fight tooth and nail to redeem themselves from the humiliation they received. When the capital received news of what had conspired in the banks of the Rappahannock, they are in complete shock. Lincoln, who had replaced McClellan with Burnside, is criticized from every angle. The Cincinnati Commercial blasts Federal high command. It can hardly be in human nature for men to show more valor or generals to manifest less judgment than were precipitable on our side that day. While Michigan Senator Zachariah Chandler, a radical Republican in charge of the Committee on the Conduct of the War, denounces Lincoln. The president is a weak man, too weak for the occasion, and those fool or traitor generals are wasting time and yet more precious blood in indecisive battles and delays. Enduring all these attacks while receiving more bad news, Lincoln depressingly writes, "If there is a worse place in hell, I am in it." Compared to the downtrodden Yanks, the Confederates are jubilant in their decisive victory. Despite their inability to pursue the beaten foe, no one could have imagined the slaughter they wreaked upon the attacking Federals. From Longstreet's entrenched lines to Jackson's defensive depth, they repulsed every attack sent their way. 3 months ago, Lee's men were on the verge of being outright destroyed. Now, they have handed the Federals a whipping they'll never forget. Many of the soldiers, believing they have defeated the best the North could offer, begin to see themselves as almost invincible. That no matter what Lincoln throws their way, they'll come out on top. Lee, on the other hand, is depressed that the victory is not a complete one, as it stands merely as a setback for the Union. The general fully knows that in due time, the Federals will return with a larger force ready to fight. With this victory, the Confederates have finally rebounded after the disappointing results from Antietam. Seeing what his army is capable of, Lee starts eyeing another invasion of the North, but hopefully in a result that will finish this war once and for all. However, as the winter of 1862-63 goes into full effect, the single-track railroad that Lee is depending on for his lifeline proves to be inadequate. Supplies will become so scarce that the Confederates will be forced to spread their forces out and scavenge like wolves just to get by. This scarcity-induced anxiety will make the Confederates more desperate in their actions in the upcoming year, willing to do whatever it takes to accomplish that elusive victory that will end the war.